Yeah. Hi guys. Good evening, everyone. In the last session, we discussed about what is web application and how to work with web application. How to deploy web application. Can you tell me what is web application? An application which can be accessed by multiple users at a time. An application which can be accessed by multiple users at a time is called as web application. So, can I execute web application from main method? No, every web application should be deployed inside a server. So can you tell me what is a server? What is a server? Server is a program which is used to run our web application. So what servers you know? Tomcat, JBoss, WebLogic, WebSphere. These are some servers which we are using to run our Java web applications. Now, web application will be deployed in the form of WAR file. WAR stands for Web Archive. What will be there in the WAR file? Dart class files will be available, HTML files will be available, CSS, JavaScript, our web pages, web content will be available in the WAR file. Okay, so once we have the WAR file, we can deploy that WAR file in the server. Apache Tomcat server we are using. In future, we will use other servers also. We are able to deploy the WAR file in the Tomcat. Either you can deploy directly in the web apps folder or you can deploy by using admin dashboard. What is the default port number of the Tomcat? The default Tomcat port number is 8080. Can we change that port number? Yes. Where to change? Where to change that port number? Server.xml. In the video I have shown you, right? So in the server.xml file, we can change that port number of the server. You can use any port number. 4-digit number is required. 1111, 2222, 3333, 8081, 9090. You can use any port number also. If you want to change that port number, server.xml file will be available in the Tomcat server configuration folder. There we can check it. Now, can you tell me what is the folder structure of the Tomcat? What folders will be available in the Tomcat server? Bin directory, lib directory, conf directory, web apps directory, temp directory will be available. What is the purpose of that bin directory? What is the purpose of bin directory? It contains the files to start and stop the server. Startup.bat, shutdown.bat. Suppose if I use a Tomcat in the Linux, sh files will be available, shell script file. In the Windows, we will use batch files. Batch stands for batch. In the Linux, we will use sh. Sh stands for shell script. In the Windows, we will use batch files. In the Linux operating system, we will use shell script files. So bin folder contains the files to start the server and stop the server. What is the purpose of lib folder? What is the purpose of lib folder? Lib nothing but libraries. What will be there in the lib folder? Jar files will be available in the lib folder. What is there in the conf folder? Conf folder. Configuration files. Server.xml, Tomcat users.xml. What is the purpose of server.xml? Come on, man. Server.xml file is used to change the port number for the Tomcat server. We can use any port number. What is the default port number? Default port number is 8080. Next one. What is the purpose of Tomcat users.xml? What is the purpose of Tomcat users.xml? To configure the username and password. Why we need to configure user and password in the Tomcat? Why we need to configure username and password in the Tomcat users.xml file? To access Tomcat admin dashboard. What is the purpose of that? To access Tomcat admin dashboard. Have you gone through that video? Some people know. In that video, I explained how to access admin dashboard of the Tomcat, how to add the Tomcat server to Eclipse IDE. Directly from Eclipse we can deploy our application. So that day when I taken the class in online, my system got hanged. So I was not able to show you all the things. Yesterday, I recorded video with all the details and I uploaded that. How to install the Tomcat server and how to change the port number of the Tomcat in that XML, how to configure users in the Tomcat, how to access admin dashboard in the Tomcat, how to deploy our web application to Tomcat from admin dashboard, and how to add Tomcat server to Eclipse IDE, how to deploy web application to server directly from the Eclipse. All the details I explained in that video. I want you to go through that video today. Okay, you will get more clarity on that part. Yeah, next, make a note. So that day I was not given the notes for you. Yeah. Right. Apache Tomcat. Apache Tomcat. Web server. Apache Tomcat web server. Apache Tomcat server developed by Apache organization. Apache Tomcat is free and open source web server. Using Tomcat, we can run our Java web applications. Using Apache Tomcat, we can run our Java web applications. Apache Tomcat server developed by Apache organization. Apache Tomcat is a free and open source web server. Using Apache Tomcat, we can run our Java web applications. Apache Tomcat server developed by using Java language. Apache Tomcat server developed using Java language. Developed using Java language. To run Apache Tomcat server, to run Tomcat server, Java software is mandatory because it is developed by Java. So without having Java, we can't run the Tomcat. Java should be installed in our system, then only we can run that. Apache Tomcat runs on port number 8080. Apache Tomcat server runs on port number 8080. It is a default port. We can change it also. Apache Tomcat server runs on the port number 8080. It is default port. We can change that port also. Apache Tomcat server developed by Apache organization, and Apache Tomcat is a free and open source web server. Using Apache Tomcat, we can run our Java web applications. Apache Tomcat server developed using Java language. To run the Tomcat server, Java software is mandatory. Apache Tomcat server runs on the port number 8080. 8080 is the default port for the Tomcat. We can change that port also. Last one. Are you writing? Good. Yeah. Guys, whenever I upload some video, that definitely that video will be helpful for you. You have to watch it. So do you know, yesterday I spent almost 3 hours to prepare that 20 minutes video. For video shooting 3-4 times, cut shot. After that, video editing. That will take another 1 hour. After video editing, we need to prepare a thumbnail. It will take 15 to 20 minutes because I'm not expert in the designing. I don't know that Photoshop and all. So I will design that thumbnail. For that, it will take 15 to 20 minutes. After that, again upload in the YouTube. It will take another 10 to 15 minutes. We need to write the hashtags. We need to write the description and all that stuff. After that, again sharing. It will take another 30 minutes. So if I am uploading one video, 4 hours effort will be there in that. Definitely that video will be useful for you. I'm not making any entertainment videos. I'm making technical videos which are useful for you. If I am posting one video in the group, that means it is useful for you. You have to watch that video. I no need to tell you, please watch it. If you watch, that is advantage for you only. Completed. Yep. So you understand what is Apache Tomcat. What is Apache Tomcat? That Apache Tomcat is a web server which is developed by Apache organization. This Tomcat is a free and open source server. Using this Tomcat, we can run our Java web application. For .NET, different server will be available. For Python, different server will be available. For Java, we will use a Tomcat as a web server to run our web application. This Tomcat server developed by using Java language. So if you want to run the Tomcat server, then Java is mandatory in your system. If your Java is installed, then only you can run the Tomcat. Otherwise, you cannot run the Tomcat. So here, this Tomcat server will run on the port number 8080. That is the default port number. If you want, you can change that port number also. All right. Tomcat setup. How to set up a Tomcat? In two ways we can set up the Tomcat. Generally, Tomcat setup we are doing in the Windows operating system. So in future we will do that in the Linux also, but now it is not required for us. Currently we are using Windows operating system, but in the company where our servers will be installed, Linux machine, development will happen on the Windows machine, deployment will happen on the Linux machine. That we will come in, we'll see in the future how to deploy the projects in the Linux. Now, Tomcat setup in Windows. Are you getting my point? Tomcat setup in Windows, right? So we can set up Tomcat server in two ways. We can set up Tomcat server in two ways. One is download installer software and install it. Second one, download zip file and extract it. Download installer software and install it, download zip file and extract it. From where we can download? Official Tomcat website is available for us. Okay, let me go to that. Tomcat.apache.org. This is the URL from where you need to download the Tomcat server. You don't need to write that URL, guys, just you keep it. Tomcat.apache.org. This is the website, official website of the Tomcat, from where you can download the Tomcat server. In two ways we can set up that. Yes, we have already done that setup. Now, Tomcat server folder structure. Tomcat server folder structure. So when we install the Tomcat or when we download the Tomcat, we need to understand what is the folder structure of the Tomcat. Tomcat server folder structure. Installation can be done in two ways. One is you can download the installer and you can install .exe file. Here you can download the zip file directly. You can download the zip and you can extract it. Once you install the Tomcat, you can see Tomcat server folder structure. What folders will be available? Bin folder will be available, lib folder will be available, conf folder will be available, web apps folder will be available, some temp folder will be available. These are important. The work and all you can leave it. That's not important for us. Bin. It contains binary files. It contains binary files to start and stop the server. It contains binary files to start and stop the server. Okay, startup.bat and shutdown.bat. It contains binary files to start and stop the server. Startup.bat file and shutdown.bat file. Startup.bat is used to start the server. Shutdown.bat is used to stop the server. It contains binary files to start and stop the server. Lib. It contains libraries, nothing but jars. Jar files will be available. To run the Tomcat server, some jars are required. Those jar files will be available in the lib folder. It contains libraries, jar files. Conf folder, it contains configuration files. Example, server.xml and tomcat-users.xml. Server.xml and tomcat-users.xml. Conf folder, it contains configuration files. Server.xml and tomcat-users.xml. Web apps, this is called as deployment folder. We need to keep war files here for deployment. Bin folder contains binary files which are used to start and stop the server. Startup.bat file and shutdown.bat file will be available. Lib folder contains libraries. Nothing but our jar files will be available to run the Tomcat server. Conf folder, it contains the configuration files like server.xml, tomcat-users.xml files will be available. Web apps folder, web apps folder is called as deployment folder. We need to keep war files here for the deployment. So keeping the war file in the web apps folder is called as deployment folder. If you go for a Tomcat, web apps is called as deployment. Tomorrow if you go for JBoss, that will use a different server. That different folder structure will be available. Server to server folder structure will be different. This is the folder structure for only Tomcat. For WebLogic it will be different. For WebSphere it will be different. For JBoss it will be different. Right? Now, what is the web apps folder? What is web apps folder, guys? Web apps folder is called as deployment folder. What is the meaning of deployment folder? It is used to deploy the war files. The process of keeping the war file in the web apps folder is called as deployment. So deployment is mandatory or it is optional? For web application, deployment is mandatory. Without doing the deployment, we cannot access our web application. Next one, temp. What is temp? It contains temporary files. We can delete them, no problem. Next one, logs folder. It contains server logs, server execution log files. Logs folder will be available. It contains server execution log messages. That means when the server is started, how the server is started, on which port number server is started. Is there any problem in the server execution? All the server execution details will be stored to a log file. That log file will be available in the logs directory. Suppose when you run your server, if your server is not started, if there is some problem in the server, then you need to check the log file. What went wrong? Why server is not started successfully? What is the problem in the server? So to understand the problems of the server, we are going to check the log messages.
Guys, am I audible now? Online people, am I audible now? Yeah, perfect. So, bin directory contains binary files which are used to start and stop the server. Startup.bat and shutdown.bat files will be available. Lib contains libraries, so jar files will be available in the lib folder. Okay. Conf directory contains configuration files, server.xml, Tomcat users.xml file will be available. What is the web apps? Deployment folder. So we need to keep our war files for the deployment in the web apps folder. What is the logs folder? What is the purpose of logs folder? Come on. Log folder contains the logs to understand.
Server logs will be available in the logs folder. Okay. Where to change the Tomcat port number? Server.xml. Now if you go to program files, Tomcat Foundation, Tomcat 9.0, conf. Here you can see server.xml file is available. So if I open server.xml file, you can see the port number. What is the port number available here? 9090. That means I have changed it. Earlier it was 8080. Now I want to start the server. Can you tell me how to start the server? Go to bin directory tomcat.exe r startup.bat file. Okay. So now my Tomcat server is started and there is a war file in that web apps folder. So it has deployed that war file also. What is the port number? 9090. Let me go to browser. Let me access localhost colon 9090. So by using that localhost colon 9090, I'm able to access my admin dashboard. So in order to log in into the admin dashboard, we need to configure Yeah. So here I have configured one user. This user is used to access our admin dashboard. So go to here, click on manager app. It is asking my username and password. So admin, click on sign in. So once I click on sign in, it is saying that my application is already deployed. Can I do undeploy? Yeah. What is the meaning of undeploy? Removing the application from the server is called as undeploy. Now I want to deploy my application again. So here in the Tomcat admin dashboard, we have the option war file to deploy. So if you go to this war file to deploy, select the war file. There is an option called choose file. Click on choose file. I have given one war file for you in the last session. Select that war file and click on deploy. So instead of keeping war file in the web apps folder manually, we can deploy from admin dashboard also. Okay. I have deployed my application. Once I deployed my application, I can access that slash welcome. What is that? Slash welcome. What is the slash welcome? URL pattern of the servlet. In my project, there is a servlet. That servlet is having a address. Slash welcome is the address of the servlet. I'm able to access that servlet from admin dashboard. So if you go to yeah. So I have undeployed my application from the Tomcat. Perfect. Good. So with this, we are able to understand what is the Tomcat server and how to install the Tomcat server and how to start the Tomcat server, how to stop, how to deploy. Make a note. We can change Tomcat server default port in we can change Tomcat server default port in server.xml file. We can configure users in Tomcat. We can configure users in Tomcat to access Tomcat server admin dashboard. File name conf tomcat-users.xml. We can configure users in Tomcat to access Tomcat server admin dashboard. The file name is tomcat-users.xml. We can deploy the application from admin dashboard also. We can deploy war file from Tomcat server admin dashboard as well. We can deploy war file from Tomcat server admin dashboard as well. We can deploy war file from Tomcat server admin dashboard as well. All these things I have already explained in the video. If you watch that, you will get more confidence and more clarity. Completed? Yeah. Any questions related to Tomcat server? Tomcat, what is Tomcat server? How to set up Tomcat server? What is the Tomcat server folder structure? How to change the port number? How to add the users? How to access admin dashboard? How to deploy war file? Are you comfortable? Any questions, anyone? No, just read the points once. Read all the points related to Tomcat. Yeah, please read all the points related to Tomcat. Done, guys. Completed? Yeah. Next one. The next 30 minutes, very important, guys. We are going to talk about HTTP protocol. So it is a theoretical session only, but without having the knowledge on the HTTP protocol, we cannot develop a web application. Okay. So we are able to send a request for the web application. We are able to get the response also. But how that request is working internally, how we are getting the response. So today, browser is in my system, server is also in my system. But tomorrow, how we are accessing Gmail, browser is available in our system, but server is available in the some other system. How the communication is happening between two computers to access a web application. I'm going to explain the internals of request and response structures. So that is very, very important to develop our web applications by using HTTP. So keep the side heading HTTP protocol. HTTP protocol. HTTP protocol. It's very, 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 very important. If you want to develop any web application, server knowledge is mandatory because we need to deploy the project to server and we need to test it, how that server is working. We should be able to customize the servers also, port numbers, users and all. We have seen that already. If you watch that video, you will get more clarity on that part. After today's class, please go through that video. It is just for 15 minutes. Right. Next one. HTTP protocol. Listen carefully. All of you close your notes. I will give the time to write the notes. Right? HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So this HTTP protocol will act as a mediator between client and server. So we are acting as a client. We are using browser to access our application. So browser is available in our system. Server will be available in the some other system. How our browser is able to communicate with the server, how that response is displaying in the browser. So here HTTP protocol mediator, HTTP acting as mediator between client and server. HTTP protocol acting as a mediator between client and server. So if you look at this, so server application, server will be running in one computer, client will be running in the another computer. Here our client application is available and assume that here server application is available. So both can be available in the same system or they can be available in the different system also. In the web application, clients will be available in one computer, server will be available in the another computer. And remember, still servlets not started. We are just understanding the basics of the web development. So these are the prerequisites to develop a project by using servlet. Server knowledge is required, protocol knowledge is required, request, response. If you have clarity on these concepts, then only I can develop one web application by using servlet. Right. Client and server. Client and server always will be in the same system, or they will be in the different systems also. Client and server may be available in the different system. Best example, I'm accessing Gmail from my laptop. I'm acting as a client. So do I know where is Gmail available? I don't know. It may be in the US or it may be in the UK. I don't know. But still, I'm able to send a request to Gmail application and I'm getting the response. So how communication is happening between one computer to another computer? First of all, in order to access from one application from one computer to another computer, we need one protocol as a mediator. Who is that protocol? HTTP protocol. Network, computer network is required first. Network plus HTTP is the mediator. My system, Gmail server system, both are connected to internet. My computer is connected to internet. Gmail server also connected to internet. So if two computers want to connect, first of all, those computers should be connected to internet. I'm accessing Facebook. Without internet, can I access Facebook? Without internet, can I access Gmail? No. So if you want to access one web application from one computer to another computer, network connection is mandatory. First of all, those computers should be connected to network. That's fine. I have internet connection for my laptop. Their computer also having internet connection. Network is available. Only network is not sufficient. Only network is not sufficient. We need one mediator also to take my data, give to server. Take the data given by the server and give it to me. Are you able to understand my point? See here, now I am taking one web application, guys. I developed one web application here. This is the URL of my web application. Let me show you. This is the URL of my web application. For this web application, I will give one number as an input. I'm giving one number as an input. If I'm giving the number as 5678, I will get some response. Take this, this is the URL of the web application, URL of the web application, and this is the number I'm giving as an input in the URL. Take this URL, go to browser, send a request. Send a request. Am I able to get the response? I'm getting some name as a response. Do we know where is that application? But I'm able to send a request. In the URL, I'm giving 5678. When I give the number 5678, I'm getting some response like this. Okay. Suppose if I give the number as 4321, I'm changing the number. Earlier, my number started with 5. Now my number starting with 4. When I give the request with this, can you see the response is going to change or not? Response is changed or not? So it is a static web application or a dynamic web application? Dynamic web application. That means based on the given number, response is changing. Suppose if I give number 9876, if I give the number 9876, what response I'm getting? What response I'm getting? Invalid SSN. If my number starts with 4, I'm getting one name. If my number starts with 5, I'm getting one name. If my number starts with 9, I'm getting some other response. So it is a dynamic web application based on the user request. It is giving the response to me. So web applications are two types: static web applications and dynamic web application. What is the difference between static web application and a dynamic web application? Static web application means always it will give the same response. Always it will give the same response. Dynamic web application means based on the request, it is giving the response. That means, can I say this number is going to server? Yes or no? This number is going to server or not? If this number is not going to server, I cannot access that application. I cannot access that application. White label error. When I'm not passing that number in the URL, I'm getting some exception. That means my project is expecting one number in the URL. Now I will give the URL as 3456. This time I'm starting with 3. When I start with 3, I'm getting California. So basically this API will take a number, will give the state name. Okay, when I start the number with 3, it is giving the state name as a California. Now, if I give the state name with 4, it will give you some other state, Ohio something. Ohio state, it is state name in the US. If I start number with 5, I'm going to get the state name as a Rhode Island. So based on the given number, the response is changing. Where I am entering the number in my browser. Who is taking that number? Server. So data is exchanging between the client and server or not. So this is the proof. If I give the number in the URL, based on the number, I am getting the response from the server. So I am sending some data to the server. Server is sending some data to me. So the data is exchanging between client and server. If you go for any web application like this, data will exchange between client system and server system. So now the question is, who is taking our number giving to the server? Who is taking the response from the server giving to my browser? So there is one mediator who will take my data, give to server. Take the data given by the server, give it to my browser. So that mediator is called as HTTP. Who is the mediator? HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP protocol acting as mediator between client and server. In HTTP protocol, we have two parts. One is HTTP request, another one is HTTP response. Whatever the URL I'm typing in the browser, I'm entering. Browser is also a program, guys. Whatever the Google Chrome browser we are using, that browser is also program. Now, whenever I type the URL in the browser, when I click on enter, browser program will execute. How we have the Java program? Similarly, Google Chrome browser, it is a program. It is a program. What that program will do? Whatever the URL I'm entering, I'm clicking on enter. Then browser will take that URL, will convert that URL into HTTP protocol understandable format. Are you getting my point? So whatever the URL we are typing in the browser, clicking on enter, then browser will read the URL, will convert that URL into HTTP request format. HTTP request. Once the request is created, that request will be sent to the server. Who will send that request to server? Browser is sending or HTTP sending? HTTP. I'm user. I'm typing the URL in the browser. Browser will take that URL. Browser will convert that URL into HTTP request object. That request object will be sent to server by HTTP protocol. Server will take the request. Server will understand the request. Server will process the request. That means our code will execute. Our code will give some response. So the response is given to browser directly. Response is given to HTTP. Response is given to HTTP. That is called HTTP response. Now, HTTP protocol will take that response, will give to the browser in the browser understandable format. Okay, whenever you send a request, whenever you receive a response, you need to remember one mediator is acting. One mediator is working internally. That mediator is called as HTTP. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP protocol will act as a mediator between client and server. Now, in the HTTP, we can see HTTP request will be available and HTTP response will be available. HTTP request
Hello,
and
sir.
HTTP response. Whenever you
Hello,
type
sir.
some URL in the browser and whenever you send a request now, that request will go to the server in the form of HTTP request object. That request will go to server in the HTTP request object format. Now, HTTP request will go to server. Whatever the request which is processed by the server is going to send a response back to the client in the form of HTTP response. So this is called as HTTP request and this is called as HTTP response. HTTP request and HTTP response is available. Now here guys, for HTTP request is one object. Some structure will be available. HTTP response is also one object. Some structure will be available. Okay. HTTP request object is divided into 4 parts. Request line, header will be available, blank line will be available, body will be available. This is called HTTP request format. HTTP request for that means I'm telling you how the request will go to the server in the background. I will prove it practically. How HTTP request is going to server when you type some URL in the browser. So when you type some URL in the browser, browser is taking the URL, browser converting the URL into HTTP request object. In this HTTP request object, request line will be available. Then header part will be available. Here one empty line will be available. And here request body will be available. Okay. So this is the format how the request is going to server. HTTP request format is divided into 4 parts. What are those 4 parts? Request line, header, empty line, request body will be available. Okay. Now I am typing the URL in the browser. When I type the URL in the browser, internally browser will create this HTTP request, will send it to the server. Server will receive the request, server will process the request, server is sending the response. When server is sending the response, here that server response also divided into 4 parts. Response line will be available, response header will be available, and empty line will be available, response body will be available. So the first line is called as response line. Second one is called response header. That is request header. This is response header. And one empty line also will be available. And here we can see response body. So this is called HTTP response structure. HTTP request format and HTTP response format. Our request is going to the server in this format. Our response is coming to the browser in this format. Just observe these 2 boxes. HTTP is a protocol which is acting as a mediator between client and server. Client is sending a request to the server. Client is sending which request to the server? HTTP request. So in which format? Request line, header, empty line, body. Like that 4 parts will be available in the request. That request will go to server. Server will execute our servlet. Our servlet will give some response. Are we getting the response directly or we are getting HTTP response? We are getting HTTP response. What is the format of the response? Response line is available. Response header is available. One empty line is available. One body is available. Yes, please observe this diagram. Request format and response format. This header is called as request header, guys. Completed? Yeah. Now see again. In this request URL, what data will go to the server? Whenever we type a URL in the browser, here HTTP method will be available. Method plus URL will go in the request line. What is the method of the HTTP method? What is HTTP method? Which URL we want to access. Okay. Whenever you type a URL in the browser, it will convert that URL into one request object. So in that request object, request line is available. Request line contains HTTP method plus URL which you want to access. In the request header, some metadata will be available. Request header contains metadata. What is the metadata? Data about the data that will be available in the metadata. Empty line means a space, a blank line will be available. In the request body, we will have payload. What is available in the request body? Payload. Payload means what data that you want to send to the server. That is called payload. When you fill up a form, login form, username and password, click on submit. That username and password will go to the server as payload. That is called request body. So whatever the form you fill up, registration form, username, password, gender, date of birth, you will fill up some details, right? After filling up the details, you will click on submit button. So whenever you click on submit button, browser will take the data from the form. It will keep in the request body as a payload. Then it will send it to the server. Whatever the forms you are filling up in the browser, the form data will go to the server in the request body. Any information which is a confidential, huge amount of data, that data we can send it to the server in the request body. Are you guys getting my point? Now here request header, what data we are sending in the body? Are we sending a form data? Are we sending XML data? Are we sending JSON data to the server? We need to tell to the server what information we are sending from client to the server. That metadata will be available in the header. Hey server, I'm sending you one form data. Hey server, I'm sending you XML data. Hey server, I'm sending you JSON data. What information we are keeping in the request body? What information we are keeping in the request body? For that, we are going to keep a metadata in the request header. Okay, to separate metadata and actual data, we have a empty line. Okay, header is available, body is available. How to separate the header and body? To separate the header and body, one blank line will be available. Where is the URL? URL is available in the first line. That is the request line. Now, here if you observe my URL, am I sending the data in the body? I'm sending the data in the URL directly. URL. That means we can send the data to the server in the URL as well as in the request body also. Now you may get a doubt. Sir, which data we will send it to server in the URL? Which data we will send in the request body? Any data which is lengthy, which is confidential, which is secret, that data we will keep in the body. Like your username, your password, your ATM number, your PIN code, your secret codes, such a kind of confidential data which you will enter in the form will go to server in the request body. Any data like book ID, employee ID, state ID, that information is not secure. If other people see that ID also, there is no problem for me. As I don't have any problem with that data, I can keep the data in the URL. So in how many ways we can send the data to server? Two ways. One is by using request URL. Another one is by using request body. When to send the data in the URL? When to send the data in the body? When the data is confidential, we should send the data in the request body. If data is not confidential, then we can send the data in the URL. Now, here I am sending one ID, state ID. ID, I'm sending in the URL or I'm sending in the body URL. Why I am sending in the URL? Not secure. Even if you remember that ID also, I will not lose anything. Suppose if I want to send my username and password, can I send in the URL? Why? Other people can see my credential. That is a danger. So if you want to send any confidential data, we need to send the data in the request body. Any data which is not confidential, that data we can send in the URL. Are you getting my point? Now, how server will understand what is the metadata, what is actual data? One empty line is available. Header will be available, body will be available. That means what we are sending in the body, we will explain in the header. What data we are sending in the body, that we will give information in the header. Request line will contain the URL. Okay, URL and method. What type of request we are sending? Are you sending a get request? Are you sending a post request? That information will be available in the request line. Are you able to understand? Request line will contain the method plus URL. We can send the data to server in the URL also if it is not confidential data. Now, request header. Header contains metadata, information about the payload. Okay. To separate the header data and body data, one empty line is available. What data we can send in the body? Anything. You can send text data, form data, XML data, JSON data, file, anything you can send in the body. The data which you send in the body will not visible in the URL. That is a confidential data, secret transfer. From the browser, my data will go to server secretly in the body. Nobody can see that data. If I send in the URL, everybody can see that. If I send in the body, nobody can see that data. So that's why confidential data we will send in the body, unconfidential, any data which is not confidential, that data I will send in the URL. So what is there in the body? Body contains a payload. Payload nothing but business data. Any data which we are sending to the server in the body is called as payload. What is a header? Information about the payload. Information about the payload will be available in the header. To separate the header and body, one blank line will be available. Do we need to prepare all this? Browser will prepare all this. Who will do that? Browser will prepare all this. We are understanding how browser will work internally. We no need to do that. We are going to web application. We are filling the form. Click on submit. That's it. As an end user, do we need to know that? No. So when you click on the submit button, browser will take the data. Browser will convert that data into request object. That request will be given to HTTP. HTTP will take the request and will give to server. Then server will execute the request. Server will send the response. In the initial response here, method. What is the method we have sent? Method plus status code plus status message. That means whenever we send a request, whether our request is successful or failure, do you think that every time server will process request successfully? Sometimes it may process successfully, sometimes it may fail to process also, sometimes there may be an error in our code. Whatever the request I'm sending, server may process, may not process. How we will understand server processed our request or not? Based on status code. After processing the request, server will send a response to the client by using status code. Based on the status code, we need to understand that whether request processed successfully or request is failed. Now, if you see here, I'm sending the request to my server. I'm removing the number. I'm sending a request to the server. So whenever I send a request to the server, am I getting status code as 404? That is called HTTP status code. So 404 represents there is a problem. Whatever I am trying to access, that is not present in the server. Whatever I am trying to access which is not present in the server. 404, it is a failure. So how we will understand request is a success, processed successfully or failed? Status code. HTTP status codes are available. Okay. For every request, server will send the response to the client along with some status code. Along with the status code, it will send that. What is that status code? We will understand. Then it is going to send some metadata. What is the metadata? Data about the data. What response the server is sending to the client, it will explain in the metadata. And one empty line will be available here. Response payload will be available. This is called request payload. Request payload and response payload. Whatever the message that I am getting, in the browser, this message server sent to me in the response payload. Whatever the response I'm getting from the browser, that response is called as a payload. What is the meaning of a payload? Business data. Client will send a request to the server. Server will send a response to the client. Client will send the data in the URL as well as in the request body. Server will send the data in the response body. My browser understand that data came in the response body. It will take the data from the response body. It is displaying on the browser. So internally, when I'm sending a request, this process is happening in the background. So when I type a URL, immediately we are getting the response. But in the background, request is created, response is created. Who is creating request? Browser is creating the request. Who is creating the response? Server is creating the response and sending the response to client. So what is HTTP? HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. What is the duty of HTTP in the web application? What is the duty of HTTP in the web application? HTTP is acting as a mediator between client and server. So in the HTTP, we have two things. One is HTTP request. Another one is the HTTP response. HTTP request is divided into 4 parts. Response also divided into 4 parts. What are the 4 parts available in the request? Request line, request header, empty line, request body. What will be there in the request line? Method, HTTP method plus URL, which URL you want to access, and metadata, header. What is the meaning of metadata? Data about the body we are sending, information about the information. What is the empty line? Empty space to separate the header data and body data. What we will send in the body? Business data, payload. Any data that we are sending from client to server, that is called as payload. Now, what is the response? How many formats are there in the response? 4 formats are available. What are those 4 formats? One is response line. Second one is request response header, empty line, response body. What will be there in the response line? Method is available, status code is available, status message also available. So what is the meaning of status code? It will tell you status of the request, whether your request processed successfully or your request is failed to process. That status you will get by using status code. Response header will be available, one blank line will be available, response payload will be available. What will be there in the response payload? Business data. Whatever the data our servlet want to send as a response, that data will come in the response payload. That response payload we are able to see in the browser. Are you clear? Now, sir, what is the proof for that? Let's see the proof. I'm using a tool called Postman. Instead of a browser, I'm using a tool called Postman. As of now, we are sending a request to the server from the browser. Same request I can send to the server from the Postman also. Postman is a tool which is used to test our applications. Now, my Postman tool is opened. Yeah. Generally, when we are developing the REST API, we will use these tools, guys. Okay? Clear. Now I'm clearing all my previous requests. Delete. Delete the history. Okay. Now, if you observe, get, post, put, patch, delete, these all are called as HTTP methods. These all are called as HTTP method. That means what type of request you want to send to the server, that we want to select here. I want to send a get request. I want to get some data from the server. I want to post request. Post means I want to send the data. Get means I want to get the data. Now, if you see here in this browser, I'm sending a request. That is a get request by default. I want to get some response from the server. I want to get some response from the server. Internally, when I type the URL, when I click enter, one get request sent to the server, I got the response. Tomorrow, when we develop a registration form, we will send a post request. If you want to send the data to server, then you need to go for post request. If you want to get the data from the server, you need to go for get request. Now, let me take this URL. Let me go to Postman. I'm selecting my request type as a get. I'm typing my URL. You can send headers. Headers you can send in the form of key and value. And you can send the data in the body. Request data you can send in the body. You can send headers, metadata, key value. I want response in particular format. I want response in the text format. I want response in the JSON format. I want response in XML format. We need to tell to server what we are expecting from the server. That we will send as a header. Okay. So here it is a get request. I'm not sending any header. I'm not sending any data in the body also. If you want, you can send the data in the header. You can send the data in the body also. Now click on send. When I click on send, did I get the response? Where is the response coming now? Body. Can you see 200? What is 200? Status code. 200 is a status code. Now here raw response, preview the response, visualize the response like this. Here we are getting the headers, response headers. When I send a request, what is the content type, what response I got from the server, what is the content length, how many characters of data I got from the server, what is the connection type, what is the server, all the information I'm getting in the header. Headers data is available and I got the data in the body. What data I got in the body? Rhode Island. What is this 200? 200 means success. Whatever the request I sent to the server, that is success. I got the response successfully from the server. When we get the response successfully, server will give the status code as 200. 200 means success. 400 means failure. Like that. Whenever we send a request, server will send the response along with the status code. By using status code, we need to understand how our request got processed. Are you clear? Now, whenever we are in the browser, we cannot see all the details. That's why I'm using Postman. Here, what method you want to send, what is the URL you want to send, access, request line, HTTP method and URL. Do you want to send any headers? You can send the headers here. Do you want to send any body? You can send the body data here. And you click on send button. When I click on send button, what happened? HTTP request is sent to server. In which format? Request line, header, empty line and body. This request is sent to server. Server processed that request and server sent the response. In the response also, headers are available, body is available, status code is available, status message is also available. Are you getting my point? Yes. So how client and server communicating internally? Can you tell me how client and server communicating internally? By using HTTP protocol. HTTP is a mediator between client and server. HTTP request and HTTP response is available. Are you clear? Now, so we need to understand what are the HTTP methods available and what are the HTTP status codes available. So when I get 404, what is the meaning of that? When I get the 500, what is the meaning of that? When I get the 200, what is the meaning of that? We need to understand those status codes also. Are you clear? Now make a note. Quick. Message is description, right? Code plus message will come. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP protocol acting as mediator between client and server. HTTP stands for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP protocol acting as mediator between client and server. HTTP protocol divided into two parts. One is HTTP request, second one is HTTP response. Now take this diagram. HTTP request format and HTTP response format. You can take like, yeah. Yeah, you have taken this one. Yeah, make a note. Client will send HTTP request to the server. 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 Server will process that request. Client will send HTTP request to the server. Server will process that request, will send HTTP response to the client. Client will send HTTP request to the server. Server will process that request and will send HTTP response to the client. Now, HTTP request format and HTTP response format. Hello, mister. Are you writing? Huh? Client will send HTTP request to the server. Server will process the request, will send a HTTP response to the client. Client will send HTTP request to the server. Server will process that request, will send a HTTP response to the client. Completed, guys. Yeah. Next, HTTP methods. Keep a side heading. HTTP methods. Get, post, put, delete. HTTP methods. So when we are sending a request to the server, we sometimes will send get request, sometimes we will send post request, put request, and delete request. Okay. Get, post, put, delete. There are several other methods also available, but mainly we are going to use these 4 methods in the HTTP. Get method, post method, put method, delete. And that too, in the servlets, we will use only first 2 methods. When we go for the REST API development, we will use the put and delete also. So in the servlets, we will use only first 2 methods, get method and post method. So when you go for REST API development, we will use the put method and delete methods also. Okay. Next one, HTTP status codes. HTTP status codes. 1XX represents information codes. So success codes. These are called as HTTP status codes. 1XX represents any code between 100 to 199. That is called as one status code, 1XX status code. 2XX, nothing but 200 to 299. Any number which represents between 200 to 299, that is a successful request and successful response. 3XX, redirectional. Redirection means we are sending request to one URL, it is redirecting to another URL. That is called redirectional status code. 4XX, 4XX nothing but client error. That means there is nothing problem in the server. Your request is invalid. Whatever the request you are sending, that is invalid request. So any number between 400 to 499, that means it is a client side problem. Client is not giving the correct request to the server. Now, when we are accessing this URL in the browser, if I am not giving the number, then what is happening? 404 I am getting. 404. 404 belongs to which status code? 4XX. That means it is a server problem, it is a client problem. Client problem. Why it is client problem? Server expecting one number in the URL, I'm not giving. That is my fault. So it is server is saying that boss, you are not giving the correct request for me. It is 404. Okay. Next one. 5XX status code is available. What is the meaning of 5XX status code? Server error code. That means server is not able to process the request. There is some problem in the server. Whatever the URL I'm accessing. So server received that request, but my code execution got failed in the server, or server is not able to handle the request. If the problem is with the server, we will get the status as 5XX. Any number between 500 to 599, that represents a server side problem. Any number between 400 to 499, client side problem. Any number between 200 to 299, success. Our request and response are successful. Now 3xx redirection. I'm sending the request to abc.com. It is redirecting to xyz.com. So if your request is redirected from one URL to another URL, then you will get the redirectional status code. 1xx, we don't use it. That is just informational status code. So like this, there are several status codes available in the HTTP. So whenever you send a request, you will get the response with the status code. Based on the status code, you need to understand how server processed our request. Okay, when we are making a request to the server, we need to use a get request or post request or put request or delete request. So get request to get the data. Get request, it is used to get the data from server, to send the data to server. Post request, it is for save purpose, insertion purpose. Okay, new resource. Put to update the data, delete to delete the data, So there are HTTP methods available: get method, post method, put method, delete method. Get method, post method, put method, delete method. Get, post, put, delete. So when to go for get request? If I want to get some data from the server, I will go for get request. When to go for post? To send some data. Generally, when we are doing the form submissions, right? Then you will go for post request. When to go for put? Already record available in the server. I want to update the existing record. Delete means if I want to delete some record from the server, I will go for delete. But in the servlets, we will use mainly get request and post request. In the future, REST API development will go for put and delete request. Okay, good. Yeah, can you read about HTTP protocol? If you have any questions, you can ask. Come on, read about HTTP protocol. Huh? That is the headers we will set in the program. No. Set content type will be there. That is a method in the servlet. That is methods I'm telling that. In the servlet, we will write that code. That is called content type. Setting the content type. In the program, we will write that code. I'm not talking about servlet. Just basic HTTP. That's it. Request.get parameter, set parameter. That is a programming side that we will do. Servlets development will not take much time. Understanding the web concepts are taking time. Server, protocol, method, status code and all. No, structure is same. The only thing is that security. Certifications will be available. That is totally depends on your network. Your network and server network also. If load is more on the server, yeah. Form submissions always will do with the post request, because some secret data may be there that should go in the request body. Any ID that you want to send, that will go in the URL. Now guys, if you observe, if you go to YouTube, there are so many videos available. When you click on the URL, when you click on the particular video, how YouTube is playing only that particular video ID. That YouTube video ID, it will send to the server in the URL. That ID is a secret or ID is not secret? Not secret. Even if you remember that ID, will Google lose anything? No. Now if you see, when I click on this video, currently youtube.com is available. The moment when I click on this video, URL is changed. Watch V is equal to, this is the ID of my video. When I click on another video, if I click on this video, something like that. Arey Baba. When I click on some other video, ID is going to change. Suppose if I click on this video, now you see ID is changed. So now this browser sending the ID to the server in the body or sending in the URL? URL. Why it is sending in the URL? It is not confidential data. It is not we want to get the video from the YouTube. So whenever you click on that video, that means you are sending a GET request to the YouTube server. Based on the ID, YouTube server will send you YouTube video as a buffer response. That video will buffering on the screen, right? So the moment when I click on this video, a GET request will go to the server, and video we are getting as a response, right? We will discuss that in the programming part. Once we start the development of servlets, what is browser cache, what is cookie, what is hidden variable, what is a session, those things will come. That will be coming under session management topic. Okay, good guys. Are you clear with HTTP protocol? Yeah. So I want you people to do some research on these methods before coming to tomorrow's session. And you need to know, here I have given generic statement, client error, 400 to 499. 401 will have one reason. 402 will have one reason. 403 will have one reason. 404. So what is the meaning of each status code that you have to understand? So now when we get 404, resource not found, right? When you get 401, what is the status message? When you get 403, what is the status message? So message will be different from code to code. I want you to do analysis on the status codes and HTTP methods before coming to tomorrow's session. Okay, fine. Thank you guys. We'll see you in tomorrow.